Hello, superstars. Welcome back to another episode of Word Up with Dani Katz. Today I am joined by my dear, dear friend, psychedelic scholar, author, editor, Robert Forte. I so enjoy talking to Robert. He's definitely a Word Up podcast favorite. And I wanted to have him on to dive into the recent drama around RFk Jr. and the ongoing Kennedy legacy. Robert Forte, my guest, actually knows RFK personally, so he brings a really interesting perspective to this unfolding campaign and story. We also get into some of the New Age ops that go way, way back. Robert's tracing them back to the Jesus myth. And we do get in a little bit to the Malibu fires, not the Malibu fires, the Maui fires. And this kind of preponderance of wildfires that we've seen erupting throughout the years. So before we dive into today's super awesome conversation, I'm reminding you to click that subscribe button. Thank you so much. It means the world. For liking, sharing, and commenting. All of those things go a long way in convincing the algorithm to give me more reach, which allows me to keep going. I'm also going to invite you to sign up for my newsletter at danikatz.com. I have lots of exciting things brewing, including live events, including new offerings like my pop propaganda class, which really is happening next month. So if you're wanting in on that, the best way to track me is through my mailing list. You can sign up at danikatz.com and at quantumlanguaging.com. I never share your email address with anyone. I don't send out emails that often, only when there's real deal value and very relevant announcements for me to share with you. Also reminding you that the way this show is structured, the first half is free for all of my listeners on all the podcast platforms, free for everyone watching on Locals and on YouTube. The second half is reserved for my paying supporters on Locals and on Patreon. So for as little as $5 a month, you get access to all of my second half conversations, plus lots of bonus content, first dibs on courses, on webinars, special discounts, et cetera, et cetera. If you are interested in tracking the podcast that I do with Emily Moyer called Words with Dani and Emily, that is available for my $10 and up subscribers. So I'm just giving you a lay of the land. I honor you finagling your finances in a way that's most aligned for you, and just wanting you to know the options. I do not have, as of yet, any podcast sponsors. I'm also very deliberately not monetizing on YouTube. There are certain enslavement constraints that don't feel aligned for me to do that. I don't want to be told what I can and cannot say. So this podcast is a real deal labor of love. And the only financial compensation that I'm getting from this is whatever you are choosing to give me through Patreon and or Locals. So as it's feeling aligned and as you're wanting access to more of my content, support me at either one or both of those platforms, links below. That does it for housekeeping. Thank you for tuning in, and buckle up, prepare to enjoy my conversation with Robert Forte. So one thing that I thought would be interesting is it feels like it's a generational thing. The weird, I don't want to say weird, but the adoration of the Kennedys. I feel like you're the generation that got that program, mind control, mythology, whatever, that we don't have. Gen X and below doesn't have. So I thought that could be an interesting place to go. I got a download from a friend on the MAPS conference and some weird things that he observed there that I thought we could talk about. I know, creepy. But what's super alive for you?
I like all those things. I like, I like current events. Kennedy is certainly a current event. And, politics is always important. Like the fires in Maui. Wow. That's, it's so hard for us to imagine that we're in this inconceivable kind of warfare. Like I don't know what the percentage of the population is, that some people are like, it's immediately obvious that that's directed energy weapon or some sinister form of warfare. But that was kind of bugging me this morning. But then I looked at Snopes and they said, no.
Oh, well then,
okay.
Then you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, because Snopes is always right.
Yeah, to put me at ease, and I was able to take a nap. But I was going to put on my Facebook page today the difference between the research and the information that argues for the directed energy weaponry, the patents, the science, the technology, the history, the examples, the photographic evidence, the testimony from people. I directly experienced it. The chemtrails came in and the sky smelled like burnt plastic and horizontal lightning and fires so hot, melted my Mercedes. And, it's when I was a little kid, I used to think how boring, I'm growing up here. We got nothing. We got Little League baseball. And like other years we had cowboys and Indians and, wars or knights and maidens and stuff. We got Little League baseball, nothing. But here we are right in the middle of a period where it's like the most intense and interesting and diabolical and potentially liberating time of human history. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. Are you frozen? Are you just, oh darn, you are frozen. Well, you look beautiful frozen like that, but come on, unfreeze.
We're both frozen. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
It's gonna be this kind of day. So I also think it would be interesting to go over, because this keeps coming up, the origination of the kind of new age psychedelic op of like, don't take any action, don't be political, just deal with yourself and your mind and do nothing outside. I think like getting to the root of that would be really helpful, given that that's being regurgitated now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does.
Okay.
In a much more sophisticated way now. And this is, that email that I sent to us, that's why this is the book I want to do, the collection of perspectives. Yeah. And so the person I think that really can articulate this the best, the beginning, what I'm picking as the beginning, is the Christ op, the invention of Jesus Christ as the first psychological operation, psy-op, in our Western history.
Okay. I'm so excited.
Are you there?
Yeah. This is awesome. All right. Well, where do you want to start? Of everything we have on our table, I'll record the intro after, just to maximize our time together. And what feels the juiciest for us to start today?
Well, I like it so far. I think it's all pretty juicy. I wish that you were recording now, because
I have been.
Okay, good. So
well, let's go with Jesus Christ as the first psyop. That's so juicy, and that takes us to the origin point.
Okay, and it also enables us to kind of sketch out the book we're going to do on this with the different voices. Yeah. And so this is not my expertise. I'm a historian of religion, but not that religion. Yep. And so really the man who I defer to, who's really been my first, I've read a lot of books on the history of Christianity. I was raised Catholic. I loved Jesus when I was a little boy. What a terrific fellow. Love your neighbor, the Good Samaritan, turn the other cheek. I always had to do that with my sister when she would smack me. And just like who doesn't love Jesus? What a terrific character. And then you grow up a little bit and you realize that Jesus is like Santa Claus. They just make these characters up in order to control people.
Yeah.
So Joseph Atwill, who is a very diligent scholar and a very dear friend of mine, and an extraordinary guy who you ought to have on your show. We're gonna have this psyop. So Joe Atwill, here's a nod to you, my friend.
Yep.
Of the many books that I've read in the history of religion on the historicity of Jesus, right? That's a graduate school word. That means just like the legitimacy. Did this person really exist?
Yep.
And well, there's no evidence that Jesus ever existed. He came into being through the Gospels in the beginning of the Roman era. And Joe, with his scholarship and keen historical sense, was able to decipher the Gospels and point out that the Gospels are sort of a plagiarized document from an earlier set of documents and stories that created this Jesus character, because there were, I'm not going to get all the details, these are just the broad strokes, because they were beginning to be dissenters to the Roman Empire. People were getting a little pissed off that they were working so hard and giving all their taxes to Caesar, and he was spending them all to brutalize the world. And people started getting a little upset about this. Imagine that. And so they made up a character. They made up an archetype to distract these people and say, no, don't worry about all that, because your status as the downtrodden and suffering ones, that's good for you, because your real reward is going to be in heaven. So render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and turn the other cheek, and love thy neighbor as thyself, and don't worry about all that real world stuff, because we got that handled. And it's just going to drive you crazy anyway. You want to go to heaven where your rewards are? Here's the way to go. Follow that guy. He's the art. And they, could play on the archetypes and make a very attractive character. They had these Messiah myths and expectations in these sects. And so they created a character. And it turned in, and that's how the Roman Empire, this brutal Roman Empire, became a kinder, gentler. See, the first time this kinder, gentler New World Order comes up, right? Your listeners probably know that phrase. That was George Bush on September 11th, 1991, proclaiming the conquest of the Third Reich. We're a kinder, gentler New World Order now. Well, that was the first version of it. The Roman Empire becomes the Christian Empire. And, I was in a museum last night, the Gardner Museum, a really cool place in Boston. And there's, Renaissance and all these photographs of baby Jesus. That was the prop. They didn't have the internet or the New York Times back then. So they just hired the best artists to hammer this archetype into everybody's heart and soul, while they raped and pillaged the countryside of any kind of conflicting conspiracy theorists that were doing their own thing. And that's how this, Western period began 2000, or so years ago, whatever it was. And and it was very effective. And that's like chapter 1 in the throw fairy dust in their eyes archetype. And they've gotten better and better at it. So how's that?
It's good. I have multiple conflicting thoughts going at once, because I know that, well, I don't know anything, but I sense that part of what we're living out now has been this ongoing beef between, to just use kind of kindergarten shorthand, this like Catholic Church Jacobin thing that goes way back to like the notion that the Templars had this kind of paper trail of the fact that Jesus was never crucified on the cross, and that he and Mary got married and had kids, and that the Catholic Church didn't want that to come out. So there were the Crusades and all these other pieces. But now I'm reading this book saying that the whole King David Solomon story was stolen from the Egyptians hundreds and hundreds of years before, which has me realizing like nothing that I've been taught is true. And then the sort of like conspiracies or alt narratives that have come in, and they're like, you know, saying, well, this is really true, that those aren't true either. So it just feels like, I mean, was that the first psyop? Was like the fact that we're allegedly humans and not some sort of like alien hybrids living on a prison planet? Was that the first psyop? You know, but I can see that being the one that folded in the acquiescence and like, don't do anything, don't exercise your agency, don't develop your own relationship with the divine. That's what we're here for. But you know, like right now it's all just so jumbled in my head.
Yeah, that's a good sign. As one of the other false prophets of our new age, William Trungpa, who's a character who was a complete fraud to my mind, but it had some great lines. And one of those great lines was confusion ought to be regarded as extremely good news.
I mean, I see that because for the past few years, I've seen the value of the I don't know, when so many of us are trying to like lock into something where the only truth right now is like, none of us really know. But I'm curious to know, before you take us to the next point, how is Trungpa a fraud?
Well, to my mind, because I'm just sort of I'm a kind of karma yogi, and I like for my spiritual teachers to embody the wisdom that they impart.
Right.
And when a guy like Trungpa, the whole Lama Rinpoche, that's another one. I kind of got into Buddhism for a while. The whole like reincarnated Lama, it just so happens that so many of those guys come from the wealthiest families, and there's just all this nepotism.
Right.
And Trungpa, you look at the legacy of Trungpa, and I'm just kind of puritanical sexually, and his womanizing and his affairs, and the legacy, like what's in this guy's wake. Right. There's Naropa. That's one of these places that's kind of like a new age fountain.
Right.
There are a lot of good strands. That's one of the things that makes this critique difficult.
Right. The
critique of psychedelic drugs, the critique of Christianity, because there's a lot of good that comes out of these psyops. Right. So by issuing this criticism or this observation, I'm not saying that Naropa is totally like all meditation is bad. I'm just saying that Trungpa as a character, to me, some people say, oh no, he was a great teacher, but to me, he was a charlatan, because he left a lot of harm and a kind of violence and sexual abuse and addiction to harmful drugs and coke and alcohol, and his the people that followed him the same way. It's just like, that's not the path that I want to follow. To take another great quote of another charlatan, the Carlos Castaneda, Don Juan stuff, a path has to have a heart. That means it has to be honest. It has to be integrated. It has to be, the people have to shine and be authentic. And that's, for some people, sure, you want to go for that left-hand tantra stuff and all the nastiest, stuff, but you just got to integrate it, and that's part of your awakening. Yeah. I don't buy it. That's just me.
Well, I'm glad you brought up both of these things, and we'll circle back around to like how this kind of, apathy and do nothing thing swirled its way into the psychedelic movement and the new age movements. But the two things that I want to touch on right now are, I appreciate you saying it's not to say that there's no good that comes out of Naropa or the Buddhist lineage. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I see with those of us who are continuing to wake up to the various tendrils of the sham show, is like, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I know we're going to get into RFk Jr., but it's like, it's complicated. I don't think because there's a blind spot somewhere or a place where someone's playing a puppet, it discounts the validity of all of their work, which is one of my biggest fears with what's going on with RFk Jr. right now. But sticking with the Rinpoches and the Lamas, I know you're going to know more about this than I will, but we've all inherited this kind of default pedestaling of the Dalai Lama and the Rinpoches and that whole lineage. And as I understand it, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but that lineage came out of Genghis Khan, a genocidal, murderous conqueror who, when he first took power, murdered all of the Tibetan shamans and ordered that all of their knowledge be destroyed. So where along the way did we start to worship the Dalai Lama? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, where did that happen?
You know what you're saying, but I have to warn you, Genghis Khan raped so many women. Like, there are more descendants of Genghis Khan in the world today. You just have to be really careful what you say about that. Their great grandpa. But yeah, no, it's like, it's crazy and funny. I just think that we have to have a real sense of humor about it. Mm-hmm. And, the history of, because I fell for the Dalai Lama. I met the guy, I hung out with him for an afternoon.
What was your experience? What was his energy like? What was your vibe like?
I'll tell you this story because it was really one of the most interesting first moments on my path. I was just, like 22 years old, and I had decided that I was taking an interest in Buddhism, and that the way I learned from my teachers at the University at Columbia, that the way you really study Buddhism, it's not books, it's about a systematic way of observing your mind. It's a psychology. And so I went on a 3-month Vipassana course in 1979 at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. I don't know anything about this stuff yet. I just had an influential teacher who I adored. He said, this is a way to go. So I went to do this. 3 months. So after the first 4 weeks, where it's very, it's like a traditional, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and you sit for 45 minutes and then you walk for 40 and you're totally silent. You're not looking at anybody. You only have, you're meditating all day long. You have a conversation with the teacher for just 8 or 10 minutes anyway, after about 4 weeks, they tell us that we are very lucky, and anybody that wants to break the retreat, we are going to be visited by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama of Tibet. It was his very first visit to the United States, to the Western world, 1979. And he was on his way from Amherst, Massachusetts to Harvard, and our place, which was the first Theravadan Buddhist meditation center in the US, he wanted to visit it. And for those of us that wanted to come out and spend the afternoon with the Dalai Lama, I thought, cool. I thought, I just knew a little bit okay, this is the guy who's like the Pope to Buddhists. And I knew about he was reincarnated, and, and I thought, wow, this is cool. This is my first chance to meet a supernatural being. So I am one of the 40 or 50 people that come into the other hall, and here he is, and he gives this, shows us films of the Tibetan escape, these grainy black and white films, and it was very, very cool. I was just starting to get interested in psychedelics at this point in my life, and he gives a talk on wisdom and compassion, and I thought that was beautiful how he spoke. I asked him how you, I thought I was going to ask him a trick question. So after this talk about wisdom and compassion, how do you feel about the communist Chinese after they've invaded your country and killed your families and raped your women? And he said, well, I have nothing but compassion and gratitude for the communist Chinese, because it's easy to practice wisdom and compassion when you're sitting in a nice, comfortable monastery. But when there's a war going on, it's a whole nother thing. So he was expressed, and I thought that was kind of cool. And then it's time for him to go. Excuse me. it's time for him to go. And I'm standing right next to him. He's got a couple limos. It's a rainy October day. I'm literally right next to him. I'm here, he's right here. And I'm checking him out. And I'm saying, okay, so he's a supernatural being. Like, what's so special about this guy? And I look at him, and on his left arm, on his shoulder, his exposed shoulder, he has these vaccination scars. Mm-hmm. And I thought, my first little thought was, again, I've been silent for the previous 30 days, and my mind's going, sorry about that. And I see these vaccination marks, and I think, gets vaccinated. Like, he gets sick. Like, what's so supernatural about that? He's just a human being, just a person. And then I look at his eyes, and he's got really thick glasses. And I thought, he doesn't even have a good eyesight. Like, what's so special? Like, there's nothing supernatural about him. And I think, no, he's just a human being. And I'm just trying to like vibe into this. It's like, what's magic? Like, Jesus fell away, Santa Claus, and now I got the Dalai Lama. Like, who is this guy? Like, no, he's just a human being. And then suddenly, we didn't have this word in our language back then, but it was like a download. And I just, like, my head started just filled with this Buddhist theology, just like a transmission. It was what they call a transmission. And suddenly I just got this whole thing about what Buddhism wasn't about supernatural. Buddhism was about presence. And there was like this reverberation. I thought, no, he's just a human being. And then this thing came in like, very human being. And it's not about going for supernaturalism. It's about, being present in the here and now. And this like download, it was the coolest thing. And I was just like, whoa, what the fuck? And then then it ended. And I'm sitting there, and he turns and he looks at me right in the eye, and he just kind of nods like, did you get that? And it sort of blew the whole thing, because it was supernatural how he did that, how that happened. And then he just kind of like gave me a little smile and waved his hand, and then he got off in his limo and drove away. And that kind of stayed with me for a long time. And I felt like special because I got a hit from the Dalai Lama like that. And so ever since then, although I was kind of confused and a little put off by all the pomp and circumstance and all the gold and hierarchical bullshit and sexism of the other, I did like cross paths with Sogyal Rinpoche, who was another Tibetan teacher, who couldn't keep his pants on, and I was put off by the Tibetan stuff, all the glitter, but that was a cool thing for me. Mm-hmm. And then I did a few other empowerments with people, but it didn't really resonate. The teaching of the Buddha, Theravada, basic Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path, that still is to me the most common sense way to reconnect with yourself and become free. And that's kind of an answer to what we'd said earlier in this thing, like when you study the history of religion and you keep realizing that all these texts and the history of religion is like so fraught with propaganda and manipulation and deceit. Like, how do you figure anything out? Well, me, after all these years, you don't try to figure it out by looking at that stuff. It's like you don't get reality by reading the newspaper. You get my like temperament or methodology is phenomenology. You study phenomena, and that stuff that happened 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, or even 50 years ago, we don't really have access to that data. Well, the only data that we really have access to is how we process our information ourselves and who we are. But anyway, I'm kind of wondering, but the Dalai Lama.
It's interesting. And I know that you've had your Dalai Lama bubble burst, but then you had a very real experience of his power, which I find interesting just because of the paradox of it all. Like, I was involved in a Mahayana Buddhist community for years. And the issues that I had with it, I loved the teachings, but the issues that I had were when we would do the weekend workshops or retreats, the music. And I was like, this is so ungodly and demonic. Like, there's no melody. This is just like this amelodic, like horrible sounding noise. Like, how is this close to God? Like, it was just weird to me how the sounds could be so god awful. And then we would have Dharma talks every Wednesday, and every Wednesday I would get in trouble for pointing my feet at the Buddha. And every time I was like, the Buddha doesn't give a shit. And actually the Buddha would side with me because you're putting a statue of him on a pedestal and trying to like micromanage my posture for some like weird kind of theater. But after I left the Mahayana tradition, because I'm like, it's too many rules and hierarchy and I don't really vibe with that, I noticed in my psychedelic experiences, the visuals were always Tibetan. You know, there was a through line there. And then in terms of my attraction to the gene keys, that being a terma that came through the Bon, the Tibetan shaman, like I really feel that connection to it. So I've had my own kind of like push pull with Tibetan Buddhism, not nearly as close as yours. But one thing that I did hear you say, which I hear coming up over and over and over again in all spiritual traditions, is he couldn't keep his pants on. And I wonder if we're not expecting too much of human beings who are all programmed with a primal biological imperative, that we think that these people, because they hold a lot of spiritual knowledge, because the Dalai Lama could perhaps read your mind and deliver, you know, a transmission through the ethers, but we expect people to not have this primal push-pull that all men and women have. And I feel like we drive ourselves crazy by expecting people, because they have so much spiritual knowledge, that they've transcended a primal biology that we've seen time and time again no one's transcended.
Yeah, well, I hear you. I'm not that whole, the sexuality thing is powerful. That's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, there are precepts that you take. You know, it's not like you have to be celibate in Buddhism. It's that you refrain from sex that is harmful or manipulative or power oriented. You know, you can still be a lover. And I'm not faulting Sokyo or Trungpa for being sexual beings. I'm criticizing them for being liars and hypocrites and saying, well, you should do this, but I can, you know, fuck your wife behind your back. And, you know, it's the illicit sexuality. Same thing with drugs. It's not like you shouldn't take drugs. You could, you know, take drugs mindfully. It's not, the precept isn't don't take intoxicants. It's don't take intoxicants to the point of heedlessness or intoxicants that cloud the mind.
Right.
And, you know, it's like that.
That makes sense. It's like, at least walk your talk, or at least be more honest with how you're engaging your sexuality, how you're engaging certain intoxicants. That totally makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So how did we get from the story of Christ being the first psyop to, and I know that Jay Stevens told me about this specific event in San Francisco or Berkeley in the late 60s, where he was shocked to see Tim Leary and some other folks again preaching this, no, don't take action, don't be political, just work on your mind. And so where do we see that in a community that has, you know, ostensibly rejected that formalized religion, but they're still using the same strategies to pacify the people?
Well, the oligarchs, you know, the propagandists, the world controllers, as Huxley called them, they never abandoned that methodology. There's always been this totalitarian instinct and urge of the oligarchs to rule and control the wealth and resources and people. So they've just tried different ways to roll that out. And it's gotten more and more sophisticated. And the 60s whole new age thing that happened, you know, MK Ultra, you know, my understanding, and I don't really know that, I don't have an actual source for this, and I really should find it. MK Ultra, you know, it wasn't the limited hangout that we so many people think, oh yeah, MK Ultras, that's when the CIA used drugs on people unwittingly in prisons, or they had the prostitutes give it to people, and it was, you know, trying to use LSD for truth serum, or, you know, MK Ultra was much bigger thing than that. MK Ultra, my understanding is that it stands for ultra mind control. You know, in German, that's spelled with a control is spelled with a K.
Okay.
This is an adoption of a program that began during, well, for our purposes, I like to just look at the post-war period, you know, roughly my lifetime, our lifetime, you know, given, you know, maybe 20 years before us, what's really happened, 20, 30 years before us, this predicament that we find ourselves in. And this predicament that we find ourselves in, I look at the beginning in the post-war period. You know, the Nazis were the ones that introduced psychedelics and mind control, and then they were recreated in this country in the post-war period through the successors to the Third Reich, you know, our central bankers and oligarchs there, the Wassons, the CIA is basically, you know, of course, that's what happened to the Third Reich. That became and a whole new form of warfare began to take place in America. It wasn't tanks and, you know, bombers and stuff. It was a psychological warfare to undermine the integrity of the American psyche and the independent spirit. That was a real thorn in the side of the oligarchs. This you know, this American mythos of our anti-authoritarian you know, that began in the Revolutionary War, the victory of the colonists over the monarchy, which you know, I love that spirit. I love that spirit. Fraud, though it may be another one of these things that we look back on and go, oh, they were all just Freemasons and they weren't really winning, and they may have been appearing to separate from the monarchy, but they were setting up their own oligarchic structure here, and the democracy and all that stuff was just another bit of fairy dust that they threw in our eyes. But I'm okay with that story right now. And especially, you know, I'm living here now, that shot heard around the world where the Revolutionary War started is just like a mile from here. Mm-hmm. And that spirit, the independent American spirit, I'm loving that story right now. And this will bring us into Bobby Kennedy too.
Do you see that story still being alive today? Like, where is that spirit now?
Well, that's a hard question. That's a good question, and it's a little tricky to answer because, again, here I am right in Concord, Massachusetts, where the Revolutionary War started, where Paul Revere's midnight. I make this trip all the time. Paul Revere's midnight ride ended right down the street, and there's still that kind of spirit here in Concord. When you go to the post office or you go to the cafe, and people like, they happen to be wearing masks when they say it now, and so it's a little trickier to get it across. But it's a weird combination of you know, trust in America and that spirit, but with wokeism. So it's a little you know, confusing here now.
Well, and it also seems that, from my perspective, it seems like wokeism is acquiescing to the government, to the oligarchs, to the corporations. It seems like completely antithetical to any sort of rebel spirit, any sort of true kind of American for the people.
Yeah, well, the hook to wokeism, the way they hook those people is, this is good for everybody. You know, you have to, like, there's this unprecedented terrible virus going around, and you got to do this. It's like for everybody, and just like it's a sacrifice for everybody. So it's a tricky little mind play, and I enjoy not getting upset about it, and just finding conversations where I can find the commonality in our you know, kind of noble American history, our anti-authoritarianism. And, you know, like, shouldn't you be questioning authority and not just submitting to it? And have you really looked at the data? And you got to like pick those conversations carefully.
Yeah.
I think that's what I do. And so, yeah, it's a really complicated psychological thing we're in.
Definitely.
What do we do about it? You know, for me, I think about this all the time, because as you know, my place burned down recently, and I don't know what to do. I have a certain freedom. Do I want to like roll up my sleeves and be a warrior and fight and try to educate and and endure all those consequences? Or is the thing like, again, this is so Thoreau and Emerson were also here, the American transcendentalist movement, where it's not, you know, don't fuck around. They're already corrupt and a mess. Like, just go a little further out west and set up your little, my new favorite phrase is sane asylum.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and that we're going to set up a little sane asylums and just leave them alone, because, you know, ultimately this realm, back to Buddhism, is dukkha. This is the realm of pain and deception and suffering, and you can get liberated from it by following the Eightfold Path or any other, you know, smart behavioral system. You can't change the realm. It's always going to be dukkha. So the idea of like trying to get a just society, that's probably not going to happen.
Well, hold up. Let me ask. I'm curious about that, because there's a theory that we're living in a satanic inversion, right? And that like a lot of truth and like nature codes and divinity have been completely inverted from this kind of satanic takeover, archonic takeover, whatever it is. And so it has me wondering, like, well, what would this realm be without that? And was the idea of the Eightfold Path and the Maya and the Dukkha and all of that created within the satanic inversion? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I sometimes wonder, I hear that like China's been fucking around in Antarctica with the ice wall, and I'm like, good, because who are we to decide that no one on the planet is allowed to go there, and what is really going on there? So I've played with this story, like, what if China like undid whatever this like kind of satanic overlay is allegedly in Antarctica and liberated all of us? And would the laws of nature still be the same here? Would gravity work the same? Like, what would this realm be without that? And how much of the sort of like precepts and rules of this realm were set up within that enslavement construct? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I just barely know what you're saying. It's brilliant and really exciting. And I think it's, you know, I think that would be a beautiful chapter. I'm looking at this, you know, sometimes I binge watch Netflix programs, you know, I watch
the CIA network.
Well, just because, you know, and just they're so clever how they keep you in the way they're written. Like, oh, now you're supposed to, it's 1 o'clock and you should go to sleep, but you're going to click that next episode. And like, what's the next episode going to be? You know, I love that. Like the Chinese are like taking apart the infrastructure. I mean, I love that. I don't, you know, again, I'm a phenomenologist. This whole language of Satanism and demonology, you know, that's kind of new to me.
Yeah.
Makes a kind of psychological sense, you know, especially when looking at current events, you know, our 9/11, I mean, there's just like an otherworldly demonic audacity to that sort of, you know, brash attack and deception, and the thoroughness of it, how they got the whole media and most of the population just acquiesced to something that's come so completely absurd. It's like it's like individuals of the same species don't treat each other with that sort of ferocity. And so you kind of have to go to otherworldly, demonic, extraterrestrial, reptilians, you know, I don't know. I used to laugh at David Icke, but, you know, everything that he says that I know, I agree with. And then he throws in these reptilians. Well, I haven't personally, all the reptiles I know I love them. I love the snakes and the salamanders, and they're beautiful creatures. I don't know that yet. I'm open to it. I'm cleaning out my pineal gland. I have apple cider vinegar every day, and I take chaga and these things, and I'm trying to, kind of wake up and see through this matrix in that way. But I don't know. I haven't had that experience yet. So to me, it's just fascinating.
When I lived in Topanga, which was such great living, and I lived in this beautiful community at the very bottom of Topanga and PCH, which was amazing because we would just like run across the freeway and swim in the ocean.
A little cafe there. What was that called? There was like the seven sisters.
Oh, Inn of the Seventh Ray?
Yeah.
That's higher up. Yeah, that's
That's
up in the canyon. But what was amazing about this was like you live in Topanga Canyon, you're not walking distance to the ocean. This community we were. And where I lived, it was a lot of outdoor living, outdoor bathtub, beautiful gardens. We had a lot of rattlesnakes. And we would catch the rattlesnakes ourselves. So like the way we did it was like, I would hold our jumbo trash can. My boyfriend would like had this fruit picker to like grip it behind the head. We had a system. He'd toss it in the trash can. I'd, put on the lid, and we would always relocate them, but sometimes we wouldn't relocate them immediately. They'd like hang out in the trash can for a few hours before we decided to drive up the canyon. So I spent a lot of time observing the rattlesnakes and just, they're cold-blooded. They will eat their young. I spent a lot of time contemplating like, what is with this species? And then many years later, I wrote a book for a spirit shaman. And that's an intense collaboration to write someone's book for them, let alone their biography. And he told me on multiple occasions, I'm a composite being. I'm half reptilian. So he told me this himself. And I can tell you from a number of experiences I've had with him, that is true. And there is behavior that can only be attributed to some sort of reptilian thing, because it's just crossed so many lines that I'm like, this isn't like humans wouldn't act like this.
Yeah, I hear you. I do sense that with certain people sometimes. I'm not going to name names here, but I almost am. But I see it. I see this.
Yeah.
The pure selfishness, a cold-bloodedness.
Yeah.
Like there's this you probably know the body language phrase duper's delight.
No.
Oh, you should look into that. You'll love that one. Where people that have this like George, okay, so here's a reference. Check this out. George Bush Sr. is eulogizing Gerald Ford in this church in DC. And he's very solemn. And he comes to this point and he goes, we could always count on Jerry. When times were hard, he always came through. Like when that crazy lone gunman killed our president, and he can't help it, and he just bursts into a little sinister little grin. And then he kind of covers it up. But that's a classic example of two things, the reptilian and the duper's delight. You'll enjoy digging into this concept of duper's delight, and there'll be certain people that you'll see, they're sociopaths, which is sort of what we're talking about. That's what a sociopath is, like a diseased psyche that just has no empathy. They're sociopaths, or not. They're just working for their reptiles. Like a rattlesnake isn't misbehaving when it bites you. It's doing what it's programmed to do. You're not supposed to go there. They warn you, and so I tried to figure this out, to have a certain compassion for some of these oligarchs that are pulling these stunts. Like, well, they're just another species, and somehow we have to figure out how to share the planet with them. I'm
fine sharing the planet with them. And I think it goes back to like the old, like the tale about the scorpion taking whatever the animal was across the river, and then at the end he eats it. And it's like, I trust sociopaths to be sociopaths. Close members of my family are sociopaths, so I understand the game. Like, you just have to trust them to be what they are. I think the issue is taking the wheel of our Earth ship out of the hands of the sociopaths and letting those of us with more compassion and more expansive consciousnesses who are attuned to the greatest good for the most amount of people, let us drive our ship and let's put the sociopaths in their right place. Like, I had a really deep, long conversation years ago with someone who was high up in the military, and she was saying, we share the planet with psychopaths. Like, there's no cure for the psychopaths. It's good. We put the psychopaths in the army because we give them a safe place to murder, you know, instead of out on the streets where there's no sort of boundaries or like etiquette around their need to destroy life. I mean, that's not, I feel how you're receiving that, and it's a mixed blessing for me as well. But it's just like, that's fine. We have sociopaths here. Let's just not let them be in charge and tell the rest of us what to do.
Yep. Or like I said before, it may be, and I'm not fatalistic, it may be that they're already so in charge that the idea of taking the wheel away from them is, I'm not going to do that. I just want to go find a little spot of the earth that they haven't gotten to yet, and just create my own reality with my own community, with confidence and experience that once we leave this planet and we die, there are all the other planets. It's a very big universe with lots of other star systems where we can be reborn. And this one, I had an ayahuasca vision like that was really convincing, that we've tried over a period of time to like wrestle control from these more demonic creatures. Are you coming back? Not yet. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can.
Okay. I think it's me. It's chaos up here at the moment. So thank you for your patience with this. But I did hear everything that you said. And I think what it comes back to, which you and I talk about offline all the time, is like, where's our responsibility as Americans, right? To stand up for the constitutional republic, to not leave it to the sociopaths, and to take ownership and agency.
Are you there?
Yeah.
It's so funny when we do freeze, and what the expression that we're like, you're pausing on this thing, like, take control from this sociopath. But, this might be a good segue into RFK.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because as you know, I love the guy.
I know. And still, do you feel the same given what's happened this past week?
I kind of took a media fast this past week, so I don't know what happened this past week.
Okay.
I do what happened. I mean, I know the Israel thing was a little like,
Well, Max Blumenthal deconstructed it really meticulously, point by point, and it's, you know, I want to hear about your love of RFK Jr. specifically and of the Kennedys, but it definitely leaves a bad taste in my mouth that he would lie to that extent, and so brazenly without the expectation of being fact checked. It's very confusing to me. So yeah, I'd love to know your take on RFK Jr., you know, in light of it all.
So it's confusing to me too. And I'll just go to the beginning, because I have a real connection with the whole Kennedy lineage and the importance of his uncle and his father in my own life, and in our modern American history for the last, 60 years. You know, so I got, just personally or autobiographically, took a very deep dive into psychedelia in the early 1980s. And then I began to realize that they weren't as enlightening to most people as I had hoped they would be. And began to sense this sort of psy-op thing going on. And there was just these drugs, unless in rare circumstances, again, this is hard to say because there are a lot of circumstances you and a lot of my closest friends, have found extremely valuable healing kinds of enlightening experiences from them. But where the general thing, anyway, I started to back away from it. And then somebody gave me a copy of the Zapruder film, and I'd never really attended to that. So I'm still in my 20s, and somebody gave me the Zapruder film, and I looked at it for the first time, and I realized, oh my God, I figured, and I never really attended to the Kennedy assassination, but then when I had this just evidence before me that obviously he's shot from the front, and then I read every single book there was on it, and it just activated. Before that, I just loved the Kennedys. My mother, I'm from Boston. He was from Boston. When I used to go to, in fact, I almost went there last night, where John Kennedy was born was like a shrine to me. And I would just feel this chills up my spine. And then as his use of psychedelics is a very, very dramatic moment in history and a real inspiration to me, because the effects of psychedelics on one's political awareness, the unitive experience, that's where I was going for. I just thought if only the right people could have these unifying experiences, they would no longer be sociopaths. They would understand the interrelationship of everything. The corporations wouldn't pollute the streams. They would know that stream, tatvamasi, there could be an awakening. And that's and the Kennedy was an example of that, because we've probably talked about this on your show, or we will, but it's a really important moment in history when Mary Pinchot Meyer, his lover, got the psilocybin from Leary and turned him on. And then I just studied the whole assassination and read all the books, and I tried to wake people up. And that's when I first began to formulate this concept of the psychology of non-perception. Like, how did we let this happen in our society, where the guy's shot in the face in broad daylight and everybody just goes about like the moment of just like nothing happened. And then Bobby, the same thing. And that was huge for me. And all those assassinations and the conspiracies, and like, why are people so fucking stupid and apathetic and inflated and still poisoned with this concept of American exceptionalism? And we live in a country that's obviously conquered. It's not the land of the home of the brave, and it's the land of the deaf, dumb, and blind. And I like, how do we wake people? It was a big thing for me. And then 9/11 really is never going to happen. And it's just a period of somber renunciation of, and so then COVID was kind of paying a little attention to Robert Kennedy and his environmental work. I knew he had a very troubled life, and it was unfortunate. I never really dialed into him. And then a couple of years ago, I'm invited to a small dinner party that's around him, a group of very cool people in the Bay Area, venture capitalists and celebrities, and there were just really 10 of us at a beautiful home. And it was an honor to be invited. And he comes, and we're going to talk about propaganda and COVID and what can we do about this. And I'd been paying attention to him at that point, and like, oh my God, this guy is speaking the truth. He's got this raspy voice, which is sort of symbolic, I think, of our voice that's kind of been impeded and blocked, but the courage, he's like speaking through the resistance. And he comes walking in the room. I've met a lot of very famous celebrities and hung out with them and had, he comes walking in the room, and it was holy shit. And it's just like his aura and his presence and the spirit of his uncle and his father. I was just, whoa. And then he came up to me and I shook his hand. I said, I'm Robert Forte. And he knew, he had done some intelligence on who was coming to the meeting. He said, you're the expert on psychedelics. And I said, yeah, I guess so. And he pulls me out of this greeting line, and he takes me aside, and we have this, like exchange of how important this is a subject for our generation, for him personally and for his family. And we just really connected. And then I spent, an evening with him and rapport about all kinds of very intense stuff, like the fact that COVID is not just, this is not a random event, but this is part of the whole deep state Nazi Third Reich thing that killed your uncle and your father and John Lennon and King and 9/11. And this is just a continuation, and he's like, we're on the same page.